Drag and drop in SwiftUI got revamped in iOS 16. We now use the Draggable and dropDestination modifiers, and that requires conformance to the new Transferable protocol. We're going to use all that to build a task manager app that allows you to drag an item from to do to in progress to done. After I've explained the basics of drag and drop, we're going to dive in a little deeper and create a custom object that conforms to Transferable, because that's a more realistic scenario than dragging and dropping just a string. Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. To save time, I already have the UI built in a starter project, which you can download in the description, but I'll review it real quick. So you can see on the canvas here, we have three buckets, if you will. We have to do, in progress, and done. And that's what these three kanban views are. Right now, they just handle strings. Again, we'll get into the custom object later in the video, but to demonstrate the basics, we're just using strings. So you can see the to-do tasks have an array of these three strings, which shows up on the to-do kanban view. And you can see the kanban view down here is just a title and a task that takes an array of strings. You can see the title there, the Z stack, which is the rounded rectangle that gives it that background that is the drop zone. And then we just have a V stack that does a for each and makes the text, add observable migration, keyframe animations, etc. So whatever array each of these views has, to do, in progress, done, that's what it will display. Okay, here's the plan. First, I'm going to demonstrate the basics of drag and drop using Draggable, dropDestination with just the strings, like I said. After that, I will show it to you using a custom object. Because right now, our tasks are just a string, but in real life, that's going to be an actual object. Take Trello, for example. This is a popular product that handles this kind of thing. You can see you have your task. You have who is assigned to it. There's comments on it. There's notes on it. So like I said, this is going to be more than just a string the vast majority of the time. So we'll get into that custom object later in the video. So step one, we need to determine what is draggable. So looking at our canvas, we want these little cards to be draggable. The add observable migration, keyframe animations, migrate to Swift data. That is down here in our kanban view here. So this text is what we have right here. We want this to be draggable. So that is a simple modifier called .draggable. Now, I'll show you real quick. This onDrag, this is how it was done prior to iOS 16. And you can see it takes in an NS item provider. That was an adventure. I had to use that for my app. So this new way of doing it, again, new in iOS 16, is way more simple. But it introduces this new protocol called Transferable that you see here. So you see Draggable takes a payload, and that payload has to conform to Transferable. For this basic early example where we're doing just a string, that automatically conforms to Transferable. We don't have to do anything. Again, we'll get to that later in the video. You'll see another parameter here called preview. This is where you can actually give it a view, as you can see here in the description. This is where you can customize what your payload looks like as you're dragging it. We're not gonna mess with it. We want it to still look like this card, as you'll see, but just so you know, you can change that if you like. So we want just draggable with the payload. What is that payload? Well, that payload is a task. So again, we're doing for each task, and again, the task is an array of strings. So in our to-do list right here, that is this array up here, this add observable migration, keyframe animations, migrate to Swift data. So what we want to be draggable is each of these tasks, the individual tasks, right? So it's for each task, so for every task in that array, here's the individual task, and then we're doing this with the individual task, doing this meaning styling it, and then we're also making each individual task draggable. That way we can press on hold on each one of these and it will be draggable. So for step one, making things draggable, that's it. Again, with just a string, it's relatively simple. Now this object has to conform to Transferable. So if I try to do date, you'll see I'll get an error that says instance method draggable requires that date conform to Transferable. Again, the string that we're using conforms that automatically, but if you're using your custom object, you're gonna have to do a bunch of stuff that we'll get into later. Okay, so let's run this and test this out real quick. By the way, before we run it, I do want to point out that I am forcing landscape orientation, as you can see here for this project. That is because for this style of layout, landscape is way better than portrait. But anyway, just wanted to let you know. So let's run it. In case when you ran it, you're like, hey, why isn't this in portrait? Okay, so here we are. So if I click and hold, you can see I'm dragging it. Okay, but nothing's happening. Okay, but again, that's just step one. Step one is getting something to be draggable. And I can drag any of these cards. So we just set up. You have to hold it for a little bit before it'll pop up and you can drag it. Okay, step one's done. Now we need to set up drop destinations. We need to configure each of these, as soon as my preview comes back, each of these buckets, right? The to-do, the in progress, the done, these gray boxes. We need to add a drop destination to them so they know how to handle the drop. So that's up here in each of these kanban views. So let's start with the in progress one. We're gonna do these one at a time. I'm gonna really explain this in progress one step by step, and then the other two will be super quick because it's a lot of copying and pasting, but we'll get to that later. So this modifier is dropDestination. So hold Option to get all of the options there. The for is what type we expect. So again, we are expecting a string.self. Again, later on we'll put in our custom type. For right now, we're expecting a string because you need to tell the drop destination, again, what to expect. And that way you can also restrict like, hey, I don't accept an image, or I don't accept some other file type, right? You want to be very specific about what kind of drops can come into your app. So the action, as you can see, it returns an array of transferable objects. So we're going to get an array of strings back and then a CG point. The CG point is exactly where the drop happened. We don't need that data. We just care as long as it's in our big gray bucket. But you can imagine if you were having something that needed precise data on where something was exactly dropped. I don't know, maybe you're building a big chessboard and you want to make sure it's dropped onto the right square. That's when you would use that. So you can see it returns an array of items and then the location. So again, this items, we're going to call this dropped tasks. And the reason it returns an array is because you can drag and hold multiple items. You know, it doesn't necessarily always have to be one string. So most of the time in our app, the way it's set up, it is going to be one, but you can drag and drop more than one item. So drop tasks and locations. We're going to delete this is targeted for now. We'll come back to it. I don't want to distract you. So here we have our drop destination. The one thing you need to do is return true. This is on a successful drop. And here in this block, right, this big block of code, the world is your oyster. This is where you do any of the code that you need to do to handle the drop. We're going to build for our specific example, but again, this is where all the magic happens. So you want to return true for the successful drop, but you can imagine, I don't know, maybe something might be nil or maybe something goes wrong. Then you will return false, that it's not a good drop. So what do we want to do when we drop in progress? Well, we want to add our string to the in progress tasks array. We're going to do more later, but I'm going to do this piece by piece. So I'll do in progress task plus equals dropped task. So whatever task we drop, we are adding them into our in progress array. So now let's go ahead and run it and test this out. Cool, take observable migration. And now you see, look at this green plus that showed up. Because I'm over in progress, that means it's a good drop zone. Now, if I move over done, that green plus goes away because we haven't set up the done kanban view. So back to in progress, we'll drop it in there. Okay, not exactly, right? We see it dropped in there and we added it to that array, but we didn't remove it from the to-do array. We have to do that in our code. But I want to stop and point out that by default, drag and drop always creates a copy. And that's because most of the time you probably don't want to, get rid of or destroy the original. Like imagine dropping an image onto a sketch canvas. You wouldn't want to permanently move that image to the sketch canvas. You would just want to drop a copy onto that sketch canvas. So that's why that is the default behavior. If you want to remove like the original, like we would do here, right? If you're moving something from to do to in progress, you would want to remove it from the to do. So we have to set up our own code to handle that. So back to the code, like I said, in this block here, the world is our oyster. This is where we handle everything we need to do. So what I'm going to do is write for task in dropped task. And by the way, there's cleaner ways to write this. I am spelling this all out for ease of understanding for educational purposes. When it comes to refactoring and how to organize your code and putting things in view models, that's all subjective. That's also not what this video is about. So that's my disclaimer. I am really spelling the code out for you, hopefully to help you understand it better. So for tasks in drop tasks. So what I want to do is whatever tasks are dropped, I want to make sure I remove them from the other arrays because they're getting dropped into the in progress array. So I will say to do task.remove all where $0 equals task. So basically if the task in the dropped task array is in the to do task, go ahead and remove it. And then we'll do the same thing for the done tasks. So we're removing it all there, and then we're also adding it to the progress tasks and drop tasks. So now let's test this out. So observable migration moved to in progress. Okay, cool. It removed it from there. Now there's one thing we didn't quite handle because now if I move observable migration into in progress, oh, now we're doubling it up. We're doubling it up. We don't want to allow the same thing to be dropped if it already exists. So let's close this out and let's run one more check here. So what I want to do is when I get this in progress task plus drop task, I want to basically just get rid of all the duplicates. I only want the unique items. So there's a cool way to do this here. If we go to File, Add Packages, and Swift Algorithms here. And by the way, I'm not adding some random third-party package. Swift Algorithms is made by Apple. You can see I'll blow this up here. The repository is Apple Swift Algorithms. So this is first-party algorithms you can bring in. There's something called .unique, which will remove all the duplicates in the array. Now you can easily do this with sets, but I wanted to keep it in array. Anyway, neither here nor there. So I brought in that package. Now we can import algorithms. By the way, Swift algorithms, really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. I recommend checking it out if you have never used this before. But what I can do is say, let total tasks equal in progress tasks plus drop tasks. So the same thing, right? I'm getting whatever tasks were dropped and I'm adding them to the in progress tasks array. That is total tasks. And then what I want to do is say in progress tasks equals, and I have to cast this to an array of total tasks dot unique. There you go. Basically, unique is from Swift algorithms, and that will just remove all the duplicates. So now in progress task is the initial in progress task plus whatever I dropped, and then remove the duplicates. That's what happens here. So now when I run it, you'll see all those duplicates being removed, and I won't be able to drop it in the same one. So now when I drop it, can't, and we're good to go. Now to finish up this Kanban view for in progress before we move on to the other two views will be much quicker, but the last thing I want to show you is how you can help the user out and highlight the drop target, right? It's just a much nicer user experience that you're seeing here. So to do that, we use that isTargeted parameter that I deleted earlier here on the drop destination. And this just returns a Boolean, it'll be true or false, so we'll call it isTargeted. And now I want to have a state variable that when it's true, I will change the color of my gray box over here in the canvas. So what I need is on our Kanban view to have isTargeted. So let isTargeted, right? So when I pass that into the Kanban view, I will change the foreground color of this rounded rectangle, which right now is that light gray color, to another color. So I know that, hey, if it's targeted, highlight it to be this color. So here in the foreground color, we'll do a ternary operator, is targeted. If that is true, I want the color to be teal, dot opacity of 0.15. You can play with this. This is just pure subjective styling. If is targeted is false, make it this gray color. So now I need another state variable to flip this to. So I'll go at state private var is in progress targeted and equals false by default. Now I'm going to need this for all of each views because I only want to highlight whatever view is targeted. So I need to track them, individually. So we'll go ahead and do is to do targeted and then also is done targeted. Because also now that I've made it a property on the Kanban view, I'm getting all these errors here that say missing argument in call, is targeted. So what I want to pass in, remember this is the to do Kanban view. So I want to pass in is to do targeted. And then same thing here for in progress tasks is in progress targeted. I'll put a space there to visually separate them. And then down here, I'll get the last one for done. So again, I'm just passing in the proper Boolean so that I highlight it accordingly. Okay, so now here on line 36, and the is targeted on the in progress view, I will say is in progress targeted equals is targeted. So whenever it's targeted, it's gonna flip is in progress targeted, which on our in progress Kanban view, well, I keep flipping between Kanban and Kanban, I don't know, whatever it is. But anyway, the ternary operator here, it'll be teal or system fill based on that is targeted. So let's test that out. And again, this is a nice to have just to help out the user, a little bit of polish. So as I'm grabbing observable migration, I hover over in progress, look, it's teal, and then I'm over done, so it's not, I'm over in progress. So you can see the drop target as you're hovering over it. Again, nice little user interface polish that helps out. And by the way, check out the human interface guidelines on drag and drop. There's all kinds of little tips like that on how to improve the user experience of your drag and drop. Okay, so let's stop this. And this is the basics of the drag and drop. So again, you have whatever you want to be draggable. We have our little cards. Mark that draggable with the task. That task has to conform to transferable. Lucky for us, string by default conforms to transferable. We're gonna do a more complex version in a second. And then you add a drop destination on whatever view you wanna handle drops. Right now, the only thing that can handle drops for us is the in progress view, which is this middle gray bucket over here. That is because that's all we've written the code for. And then when we drop it, we're removing, the task from the other arrays, and then we're adding it to the new array, and then we're calling unique from Swift algorithms to make sure, we're not having any duplicates, and then we're tracking the targeted. So that was a quick run through. Let's do some repetition here. So I'm going to copy this drop destination onto the to-do destination, right? So we got the drop destination. We're expecting a string type. That's going to change in a second when we do our custom type. We're going to iterate over the array of drop tasks because again, you can drag and drop more than one object. So we're going to iterate over that and remove from the, not the to-do, we're in the to-do. So from the in progress task and the done task. That is because those are the other two buckets that we want to remove them from. And then let total task equals to do task plus the drop task. Cool, so we're creating a total task. And then we want to do to do task, call unique on it so we can get rid of all the duplicates. And then the target we're not tracking is in progress targeted, we're tracking is to do targeted. So as you can see, like I said, this is where all the magic happens, this block. Whatever code you need to do to handle your drop, whether you're deleting items, adding items, moving things around, tracking indexes, whatever you're doing, this is the magic block where all that happens. So now we basically do the same thing for the done view. So Command V, again, we're expecting a string, drop task, that's the same. We want to remove it from to-do tasks and in progress tasks, right? Everything but the done, because we're currently on the done. And then we're creating the done tasks array. And then we are still creating the done tasks array, making sure it's unique. And then we're tracking the is done targeted. Okay, so I know that was really fast, but it was review and we're still on the basic part. So let me run this. And now everything should highlight. So in progress highlights, done highlights, to do highlights, in progress, done, cool. And I can drop it everywhere. Take observable back to do, done, keyframes into in progress, now into done. So you see we have this working Kanban board. Great. This is just the basic drag and drop using is targeted and showing you, how that basic works. But like I said, back to this Trello example, most likely you're not going to be dropping a string. You're going to be dragging and dropping an entire object. And that's what we're going to tackle when we create our custom object and have it conform to transferable. And there's a few extra steps for that one. But before we dive into all that, I got to tell you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to help you get that iOS developer portfolio, blog, or personal website up and running very quickly. Now I know we're all developers with these skills and the desire to build the web page ourselves, but I would argue there's an opportunity cost to your time. If you're an iOS developer trying to build a great product, a great app, maybe spending a lot of time learning the ins and outs of web development, responsive design, isn't the best way to spend your time. That's why I recommend Squarespace to build that personal website, the blog, your portfolio, or maybe a landing page for your app. They have all kinds of beautiful themes and templates to get you started. They handle all the analytics and the SEO for you. Again, it just saves you so much time so you can get back to doing what you want to do, and that is building iOS apps. So when you're ready to get started, go to squarespace.com to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/SeanAllen to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So like I said, most likely dragging and dropping just a string, not gonna cut it for you. So let's create our custom object called developer task that will conform to transferable so we can drag and drop that around. Now there's 3 things we need to do to make this happen. The first is actually create our object. The second is to actually conform to transferable. And the third is to create our custom uniform type identifier so the app knows what a developer task is. Okay, so let's create that object. I'm gonna scroll down a bit. Just gonna keep it all in one file for ease of use. So we'll say struct developer task. I didn't want to call it just task because that's a thing like in Swift. So developer task, and we'll say let ID of type UUID, let title. I'm just going to make this super simple. It's not going to be a full-blown object. So title is a string. Let's say it has an owner, like pulling up the Trello example. You see how a task can get assigned to someone. In a real app, this might be like an actual like user object, but for us, it's just going to be a string because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And then we'll say, I don't know, let's just say it has a note on it too, which is a string. So again, just a super basic example of a custom object that we're gonna have conform to transferable. So let's do that. Transferable, there you go, there's the protocol. And if you do Command B, it's gonna say it does not conform to it because it's missing the protocol stubs. So the one thing you need to conform to transferable is letting it know what representation type it is. Let me type this out and we'll come back to that idea here. So static var transfer representation. There's 3 types of transfer representation. There's the codable type, which is what we're going to use, and you'll be using, when you use a custom type. There's data representation. The common example of this is transferring something into a CSV file and shipping off that data. And the third representation type is file representation. This is something like a movie file. But again, we're going to use the codable representation. So we need to tell transferable what type of representation it is. So you can see codable representation for content type. And you see content type down here is a UT type, that is uniform type. Now, for us to use codable representation, our object has to conform to codable. Hopefully you're familiar with codable. It's been around for a while in Swift, but essentially codable helps you decode and encode an object into data. So that's essentially what codable does. We can automatically conform to codable because our objects are just strings and UUIDs. The basic, foundation types typically conform to codable out of the box. If you have some crazy custom type, you might have to do a little extra work beyond the scope of this video. If we conform to codable, we can now use codable representation. Now, the 2 things that happen in transferable. Transferable needs to know, how do I convert this into data, which is what we just told it. Convert this into data via codable. Cool. And then transferable also needs to know, when I'm converting this to and from data, like what type is it? And this is where this UT type comes in. So if we hit dot, you can see this crazy long list I mean, there's a ton of stuff in here. Audio, bitmap, bundle, header, contact data, database, email, you can see all these files, right? It's crazy. HTML. I'm gonna put HTML in there for now. This is not the type we're gonna use. I'm just doing this so Xcode stops yelling at me and gives me errors. This is where we have to create our own custom uniform type identifier. And this is so the system knows like what our type is. So down here under the struct, we're gonna do extension on UT type, but I don't have access to that. Up here in my import, I need to import uniform type identifiers. And by the way, if you're not super familiar with uniform type identifiers, going down the rabbit hole on them is beyond the scope of this video, but I will put a link to a nice WWDC session from 2021 called a reintroduction to uniform type identifiers to familiarize yourself with them. So scrolling back down here, uniform type or UT type, there we go. Now I get the autocomplete. So the extension on that, I want static let, we'll say developer task, because that's what we called our object up here, developer task, equals UT type, and then exported as. And if you read the little description, it says creates a type your app owns based on an identifier and a super type, versus imported as creates a type your app uses but doesn't own. This would be if you were accepting drag and drop from some other app in their special type. So exported as, and this is where you use your bundle identifier. So co.seanallen.developer task. So whatever your bundle identifier is and the name of your type. So now we need to use this custom type we just used, this content type. Back up here on 117, where we put the HTML in just as a placeholder, now we can do .developer task. And now we have our own custom type that Transferable is expecting, right? Again, Transferable has two things. How do I serialize this or turn this into data? We're saying use codable. And then what type is it? And now we're telling it it's a developer task. Now there's one final piece to the puzzle with this custom UT type. If we go to our plist, here you can see exported type identifiers, and then there's imported ones down here, but exported type identifiers, hit the plus here. The description is a developer task identifier. Again, what we just did, co.seanallen. This is your bundle identifier. Don't use mine, whatever that is. Developer task, it conforms to com.public.data. This is like the parent uniform type identifier. Public data is what you use for your custom objects. Again, if you want to do the deep dive into uniform type identifiers, check out that WWDC video. But that's what you want to put for your custom objects. Okay, back to the content view. Those are the three steps we should be set up. Now the last thing we need to do is actually adapt our code to handle our type instead of just strings, right? You see we're taking strings all over the place. So let's replace the string with it's an array of developer tasks now. I'm going to copy that developer task, paste there, paste there. Now it's an array of strings, so this doesn't quite comply, right? We need an array of developer tasks. Well, I'm going to bring in some mock data so we can use that. Okay, we'll scroll down. We'll put this under our UT type here. So I'm going to paste that in there. Feel free to pause the video, type that out. This video is getting long enough. I'm trying to save some time here. So now up here in our array, instead of a string, we want to do mock data.task1, mock data.task2, mock data.task3. So I populated it with the 3 tasks just for the dummy data. So we'll just go right on down here, right? Getting an error on the tasks we pass in to the array. That's because our Kanban view expects an array of strings. Well, now we want to expect an array of developer task. Now down here in our developer task, so for each task, instead of ID of self, we can do ID because our developer task has a property of ID. And then now instead of the whole task, we want to do task.title. That's what we want to display on our card. But that's what we did. We replaced a string with the developer task and iterated over that array of developer task and pulled out the task.title to show. So scrolling back up, now the drop destination is no longer expecting a string, it's expecting a developer task. Copy that. Let's go ahead and do the drop destination for each of these. And I'm going to show you what happens when we expect a different type here once I get all these errors done. So now all of our drop destinations are expecting a developer task instead of a string. So now what we want to remove, we want to match up the IDs because this used to just be matching the strings. Now we want to do, hey, for each task.id, if the task IDs are the same, go ahead and remove it. So I'm going to copy this because I'm going to basically be pasting .id everywhere we had the $0 and the task. I'll reiterate that because I'm thinking to myself that might not have made complete sense. What we're doing here when we're removing all and we're kind of iterating through the array of tasks, remember these tasks used to be a string, now it's a whole object. Now it's a developer task object. So I can't compare the whole object, I want to compare the object's ID property. And if the ID property matches, then go ahead and remove that. That's what I'm using to find where I need to remove the task. So that's why I added .id afterwards. Now, what this is saying is when you use unique on a sequence, that underlying data, right, it's an array of developer tasks, that needs to conform to hashable. So that's quite simple. If we go down to our developer task, we'll do hashable. And the reason I can just type hashable in there is because the underlying property types, string, UID, all conform to hashable themselves. Again, if you have a crazy custom type in there, you might have to write out your own hashable conformance. So now if I test this, this should all be the same. I see 2 keyframe animations. All right, I have a copy paste there somewhere. Task 1, there we go. This should be task 3, not task 2. Some of you probably caught that when I did that, but yeah, so now I have the proper dummy data in there. Now when we run it, this should all work as it was working before, right? In progress, keyframe animations, move that over to done, cool. Again, nothing is different except we're moving whole objects now, not just the string. We're moving an entire object, which again is the more realistic scenario if you're building a real app. Now the last thing I want to show you before you go is how this type really matters. So in the done view, right now, like I said, we're expecting a developer task.self. Well, let's say our done view was different and I wanted to accept strings here and not developer tasks. Again, this is just an example of how I'm going to need to comment out this code just for the example's sake. So we'll run it and then I'll show you how, again, that drop destination type matters. So I can move to in progress, great, but I can't move to done. And you see, it doesn't show up as targeted. I get that no symbol. Like this is not a valid drop target for my object of a developer task. The done bucket is expecting a string. So hopefully that reiterates like how important setting up your drop destination, types are. So that is the new drag and drop in iOS 16. If you like my teaching style, I have a whole bunch of SwiftUI and UIKit courses up on seanallen.teachable.com. See you in the next video.